Hello and welcome to Windows in Time, Mining Camps in Oregon's Early History, presented by Jackson County Library Services and the Southern Oregon Historical Society. I am Spencer Ellis, Adult Services Librarian. This program is being recorded. Please mute your microphone and turn off your camera to ensure quality recording. There will be a time to answer your questions at the end of the program. Jackson County Library Services acknowledges that its libraries are located within the traditional lands of the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians and the Modoc Nation, as well as the Shasta, Tacoma, and Lotgawa people, whose descendants are now identified as members of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. We take this moment to recognize the Indigenous people whose traditional lands are where residents of Jackson County live today. JCLS is committed to fostering understanding, deep respect, and honor for Indigenous people, and we encourage you to learn more about the land you reside on. For more information, go to jcls.org/land. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Jackson County Library Services. With that, I will now hand it off to Larry to introduce our presenter today. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for jumping the gun a bit. Welcome to Windows in Time, and we have a really exciting speaker today, but before I introduce her, I just want to give you an announcement of an upcoming event that the Society is sponsoring. On July 1st and 2nd at Southern Oregon Historical Society Hanley Farm, which is just this side of Jacksonville on Hanley Road, we're celebrating in music and costumes with talks, tours, and hands-on experiences our common cultural heritage of the 19th century. So this is the name of the event is Hoopla, which is meant to connote excitement. It also connotes a lot of variety, and we have some very interesting things happening out there. So this is the annual big summer farm opening. The house will be dressed for customers, for visitors, and the barn, one of the barns will be open, and we have lots of other good things happening. And with that, we've got something good happening today, and that's our talk, Mining Camps in Oregon's Early History, 18 years worth, given by Tatiana Watkins. Tatiana grew up in Phoenix, and she attended Southern Oregon University, and she's now a graduate student at Idaho, University of Idaho. And both at Southern and at the University of Idaho, her major's been anthropology, and I'm learning that archaeology is a subset of anthropology, and so her interest is very much that. While she was at Southern, she developed an interest in the Rogue Valley history, focusing on the Rogue River War, but also on Chinese railroad workers. And since graduating, she's continued to work in Southern Oregon as well as Eastern Oregon on the Malheur National Forest. And currently, as it says up here, she is an archaeologist with Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest. And with that, I turn it over to Tatiana.
Hello, everybody. Can everyone hear me in the back? Perfect. Well, that was the introduction I was going to do, so I guess I'll get started. I will say I am an archaeologist now for the Rogue River Siskiyou, but this presentation is about the work I did on the Malheur National Forest. All right. So I'm starting with a breakdown of the content discussed in this presentation. First, I'll begin with an overview of Chinese diaspora in the United States, from emigration from China to economic opportunities, as well as the constraints and discrimination perpetuated by white colonialists. Then I'll give a background on gold mining in Oregon, giving an overview on the types of technology used in earlier mining and the archaeological remnants of this exploration, and begin discussing some of the earlier Chinese miners of the area. To contextualize this work, we'll look at the history of anthropological and archaeological study into the Chinese diaspora, with its fruition in the 60s to the current work being conducted. The case study for this presentation revolves around the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project. You might hear it referred to as the OCDP. and the continual utilization of passport in time, also known as PIT projects, to conduct field work. The results from this study look at what archaeologists can decipher through the archaeological records and materials. So let's begin with Chinese migration. Many Chinese people immigrated to the United States from the Guangdong province of southeast China. This area is located near a rather substantial trading port. Emigration from this area started as far back as the 7th century, with migration to countries such as the Philippines, Vietnam, Peru, Chile, Australia, and New Zealand for their economic opportunities. And immigration to the United States started in the 1840s. This was when the US acquired trading privileges with China. The immigration to the United States happened for several reasons, not just the above-mentioned cultural tradition. There are multiple factors in China, including governmental collapse, war, famine, and economic depression. Another driving factor was the California gold rush of 1848. Chinese began entering the country through primarily California, as well as Portland and Seattle, working as laborers in the gold fields. Still, there were also other methods of employment, which I'll talk about on the next slide. As more people came to California seeking gold, the gold fields soon started to dry out, and many miners began moving to find additional gold prospects. Chinese migrants encompassed many jobs. Of these include merchants, physicians, working in laundry, cooks, and skilled laborers, primarily miners and railroad work, as well as chefs, servants, and farmers. The census records available have preserved the multitude of jobs held by the community. There was heavy competition for gold claims and employment during this time, and as mining progressed, it started a long list of anti-Chinese legislation and actions. These are just a few of the laws set forth against the Chinese community in the United States, and some in particular in Oregon. An important part to note is the drawing depicted on the left side of the screen titled, quote, "Every dog has his day," unquote, in which an indigenous man is warning a Chinese man that much like his experience with white Euro-Americans, the Chinese community will become targeted and excluded. You see in the background an African-American man saying that his day is coming. This depicts the slippery slope of discrimination and social inequality perpetuated based on cultural, ethnic, and racial differences. With this process of discrimination and, quote, running out of different cultural groups, we see the purposeful exclusion from the history books, from our understanding of what life was like before us being alive. But the presence of these excluded groups are all around us, and we can see it through archaeological studies. The contributions of the past have made permanent impacts on our landscape. One of those significant impacts on the landscape was from mining. John Day, Oregon, received Euro-American attention with the discovery of gold in 1862. Before the discovery, Eastern Oregon was an established route from the gold fields of Southern Oregon to Idaho's budding gold rush. Along the route in 1861, small gold deposits were located in the Blue Mountains, seen in the dark blue circle on the map, but the focus remained on the guaranteed profits of Idaho mining. However, by the time miners traveled from Northern California and Southern Oregon to Idaho, most of those areas of gold mining had already been actively mined. This caused miners to retreat back to Oregon, where gold was discovered along Canyon Creek in 1862, spurring a mining boom in this rural area, which expanded north and along the middle fork of the John Day River and within the confines of now Malheur National Forest. When discussing early original mining, we're discussing placer mining. Placer mining is recovering gold that has broken off of that main ore and is usually in alluvial deposits, meaning that they're found in creek beds. When you think of an old prospector, you think of one of the first photos, someone bent over the water with a gold pan. This is the first placer mining step. Then, if the initial prospecting proves fruitful, more complex equipment is brought in, including small rockers and sluice boxes. And if the deposits are very valuable, hydraulic mining will come into play, using more pressurized water and more expensive equipment. And the technologies used in placer mining create these very significant scars on the landscape, which as archaeologists, we refer to them as features. These can include prospect pits, ditches, placer cuts and wash pits, dams, reservoirs, and tailings, just to note a few of them. And each of these combined create what we call a mining complex, a full system in place to extract gold. While some of these features may have only been used once or were continually utilized throughout mining, they can still be seen today. As archaeologists, we work to identify each of these components. Let's begin with ditches. They transport water throughout a placer mine. The photo on the top right shows what a ditch can look like now, which seems like nothing. And sometimes they're almost as deep as the image to the left. But one of the benefits of technology now is that we can see through LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, a mining ditch that is still there today, as shallow as it may be. The arrow is pointing to a current ditch system that is still in place. Let's not forget prospect pits. They're usually in the first stages of gold mining process. These are seen on the ground as small depressions with rocks normally piled near them. We can see large depressions in the landscape, and we can suspect through LiDAR that they may be prospect pits for us to go out in the field and look at. Placer cuts and wash pits are when more extensive mining is taking place in the area, and you see these thick cuts in the landscape where water plus the miners either have washed away or shoveled that part of the landscape away, or even used the pressurizing of water to literally blast through the landscape. Dams and reservoirs are only sometimes found on mining complexes. However, if a substantial amount of work needs to be done in the area due to it being rich in deposits, a dam or reservoir could be constructed higher up to bring water down and extend that mining season longer. Tailings are the waste of mining. They are rocks, usually within that placer cut or wash pit, that miners have stacked during work. These tailings can be smaller or more spread out depending on availability of movements. If there are a lot of workers in a small mining setup, they may need to stack the rocks a little more carefully and more tightly to continue working and not worry about any rock collapse or lack of space. That's when you hear the term, rock walls associated with mining. That's often the case, and why they're constructed that way is for safety and lack of mobility. And with this mining process, associated artifacts can be found within or adjacent to these complexes. Common artifacts are associated with mining can include these nozzles and penstocks, which were used to pressurize and control water flows, a gold pan used in initial prospecting, shovels to clear areas or bring deposits through a sluice channel to collect gold. And while all of these elements create a mining complex where you can see where the work was completed, how it was constructed, there is one question we have to ask. Where are the people? As archaeologists, how can we figure out who worked on these complexes? What avenues of research do we need to find out? Well, we have to go further than the material culture. We do have remnants of potential mining camps where there may be domestic artifacts, such as tablewares, canned goods, and bottles, but that only shows the presence of people and possibly their day-to-day lives and activities, but names and demographics can be very hard to decipher. That is when we look for archival information, and that could be through photographs, newspaper articles, mining claims, census records, store ledgers, and personal accounts. The possibilities to find this information are very widespread. It's just having the time and resources to find that information. Through the use of archival research, we know that gold was found in 1861 in the Blue Mountains and John Day the year after. Through mining claim records, we see the areas along Canyon Creek were regularly mined and then expanded to the John Day River and surrounding areas. Through newspaper clippings, we see that 1866 was the first mention of Chinese immigrants in that area. The archival documentation is necessary to make these connections, is necessary to date sites, and is incredibly important in the interpretive element of archaeology. But how did this research into the Chinese diaspora begin in Eastern Oregon and the United States as a whole? It began in the 1960s and started to gain traction in the 80s and 90s. This is more commonly known at that time as overseas Chinese archaeology. This time emphasized the persistence of traditional culture combined with limited change. The idea of Chinese migrants came to the United States, worked, sent money home, and always intended to go back home. Now, while this can be correct, that some Chinese migrants intended to go back and some of them did, this theory tends to place Chinese immigrants into a box and doesn't offer much additional interpretation. The earliest archaeological work in this field focused on artifact typology and identified artifact assemblages unique to Chinese sites, including ceramics, diet, and documented a range of sites, including rural and urban Chinatowns. The Asian American Comparative Collection in Idaho was founded in 1982 to help support early efforts to standardize these practices and understanding material culture in these Chinese sites. In the 90s and early 2000s, there was an increase in conducting large comparative studies encompassing material culture and faunal bone analysis and creating a more inclusive picture of Chinese diasporic experiences. It also expanded into more non-urban contexts and examined industries such as shrimping, fishing, mining, and railroad work. The discipline became increasingly published in the mid-2000s to early 2010s. There was a broader discussion on topics such as racialization and consumerism. Recent publications have highlighted the diversity of experiences of Chinese migrant communities. New themes are also explored, including the responses to the anti-Chinese movement and exploring the ways Chinese cultural practices and beliefs were transplanted and modified for life in the United States. There has been a considerable expansion into this field in recent years. There has been a recognition that researchers in the field have not fully moved past using just ethnic markers as verification of Chinese presence. There have been continued calls to reframe this archaeology to acknowledge community connections. And there's also a call for more interdisciplinary collaboration between archaeologists, historians, and other applicable fields and the descendant communities. Now, I have used the term diaspora many times in this presentation, so let me take a step back and define this term. Diaspora is used in many contexts in the archaeological community, and with that comes many different definitions. So how I have been defining diaspora is a spatially dispersed group whose continual relationships are determined through shared histories, cultures, and impacts of racialization. It's also a tool to investigate the experiences of displacement, tracing specific groups from a homeland to a new setting, and compare linkages with other groups. It's also a presentation of identity, the acknowledgement and connection to a homeland that has been separated due to a movement. Now, how am I using this in my work? How can I utilize the resources around me to discuss this subject? Well, I'm not doing it alone. The Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project, OCDP, was founded in 2016 through a partnership with the Malheur National Forest and the Southern Oregon University's Laboratory of Anthropology. They're also known as SULA. I'm sure many of you have been to Chelsea Rose's talks. The project has since expanded its partnership to the Medford District Bureau of Land Management, the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest, and Kamwha-Chung State Heritage Site in John Day, and informal partners through the Oregon Historical Society and Portland Chinatown Museum. The OCDP's goal focuses on research, collaboration, and education regarding Oregon's early history, Chinese and Chinese American residents. The Malheur National Forest has hosted projects since 2017 with field schools with SULA, public lectures, outdoor events, and yearly conference presentations. Passport in Time, PIT projects, is a Forest Service-run program that enlists the help of volunteers from around the country to preserve cultural resources, whether that be through research, excavations, or interpretation. Though past pit projects have been conducted on Chinese mining companies on the Malheur, they have hosted 2 pit projects directly associated with the OCDP. The first was held in July of 2019 with a Sula Archaeological Field School, and the last pit project was held at the end of June, early July in 2021. The project explored potential camps occupied by Chinese gold miners during the late 19th century. Let's give historical context on the site we chose for the OCDP and PIT projects. Following the arrival of workers along Canyon Creek, Euro-Americans branched out to claim land ownership through the Homestead Act of 1862. One area of interest was along the middle fork of the John Day River, which supplied sustenance and vital waterways for agricultural and mining purposes. The sites associated with this research are along a tributary of the middle fork of the John Day River. One of the earliest documents of Euro-American presence in the area was found in the mining lease agreement between the landowner Stephen Graham and the Yi & Co., a Chinese-operated mining company, in May of 1869. Graham, recorded in the census as a hotel owner, used the land for agricultural purposes, with gold prospecting occurring along the creek within the confines of his land. The mining lease included, quote, 10 mining claims, more or less situated in 4 gulches, also 1 ditch and 20 sluice boxes, and 3 picks, 1 shovel, also 1 cabin, end quote, indicating that prior prospecting had occurred in that area. However, there is no documentation to verify who quite did it. The most likely explanation is Graham testing his land for potential gold, and the ditch would have been utilized to bring water to those prospects and for agricultural purposes. While the company began mining in this area in 1869, there is no evidence of long-standing occupation. In September of 1870, the company sold its lease to the James Taylor Mining Company for $42.50. This lease was sold 5 days before Graham sold his property to Thomas Davis, listed in the 1870 census as a hotel keeper. Following Yi & Co.'s presence on the tributary, additional mining regularly occurred around the area. While there are a few mining claim lease agreements in this area, newspaper reporting offers a broad timeline of mining. Mining in this tributary has been consistent. A write-up of the Condon Globe in November of 1895 reported good claims along the creek with continual mining planned for the spring after. As placer mining became a less practiced form with lode mining dominating the landscape, this area continued to profit miners. A newspaper article, for the Morning Oregonian in November of 1913 reports owners making a profit of over $50,000. A 1941 overview of mines in Oregon note that the area was undergoing a recent resurgence in mining activity, and the water available is sufficient for a mining season of 3 spring months and 1 fall month. The continual presence of mining and the profitable mentions in the newspaper articles show that this area was financially beneficial to mining companies. This begs the question, why did the Yi & Co. mining company only work for 17 months before selling their lease? Was this due to financial prospects elsewhere, or is this a direct link or association with Graham selling his property 5 days following the transfer of mining rights? The goal of the fieldwork was then directed at determining where the company worked and if there was evidence explaining why there was only 17-month occupation. If the company had planned a short-term stay in the area or had planned to continue working there a long-standing period. The site that we focused on encompasses 23 documented features. It is quite a big site. Most of the features are associated with the mining of that area, except for railroad spurs located along drainages, and 2 features either associated with railroading or mining. There's limited information to determine the appropriate context. 3 of the features described in the site record include camps believed to be associated with mining companies. Features 13 and 14 were the focal areas of interest for the 2021 PIT project. Feature 13 is located along a drainage on a small bench in a floodplain. The initial recording noted multiple wooden boards, cans, round nails, and shovel pieces. A possible structure was noted within a tent platform, including piles of rocks resembling a collapsed fireplace. Farther north of the feature, within a mining ditch, a mining pipe, also known as penstock, was noted. A small placer cut was observed just southwest of the potential tent platform, and a railroad grate was directly east of the feature, running right along the drainage. Feature 14 is described in the site record as two badly deteriorated structures, neither of which were there when we saw them. Surface artifacts noted during the initial reporting include can fragments, glass, ceramic sherds, and labor tools, including a pickaxe and a shovel. Limited subsurface testing was conducted using a metal detector and testing near the southern structure. This uncovered a bullet, 2 can pieces, square nails, and glass. Site 1333, the next site, has been documented in the archaeological record since 1993. This site is situated in the midst of an extensive mining complex with visible features, including a dam, placer cuts with associated tailings, and multiple ditch systems. This cabin site is located east of the tributary described in the 1869 mining lease agreement between Augie & Co. and Graham, providing the documentary association with this mining company and the landscape surrounding the site. So we believe they are connected, and this was the cabin. During this recent project, 16 volunteers were chosen out of 63 applicants for the PIT project. In collaboration with Forest Service employees, these volunteers excavated 2 sites, Features 13 and Features 14. During the 5-day session, volunteers completed pedestrian and metal detector assisted surveys, recorded and collected surface artifacts, and excavated multiple areas in each site. When I say pedestrian survey, we're just walking in a line. One interesting note in why we chose those 2 sites is because there is a large placer mining wash pit that spans about 50 meters, and it connects both of these features. So we wanted to see if they were associated with each other. Metal detector lanes set at 1 meter wide were laid out over the extent of both sites before the start of the PIT project. We want to do a little prep work so it's not just so everyone has a fun time during the PIT project. Volunteers began the session with the pedestrian survey, going through those lines and marking any surface artifacts with plastic discs, poker chips, which were used to avoid interference with the metal detectors that followed soon after. After metal detecting, all of the hits and surface finds were mapped by hand, while volunteers collected the surface artifacts and replaced those little plastic discs with pin flags. You can see some of the pin flags in the photos. There were quite a few, and we lost many plastic discs trying to collect them all. Following surface artifact collection, areas were chosen to be excavated based on the hits and overall pattern of artifacts we saw. We dug quarter test units. These are 50 centimeter by 50 centimeter squares, dug in systematic levels to locate and properly document artifacts. There were 4 QTUs, as we call them, quarter test units, at Feature 13. It was a substantially smaller site as opposed to Feature 14. And Feature 14 had 8 of those QTUs we did. Using a pinpointer, which is a little mini metal detector wand, it's very nifty, volunteers and Forest Service employees conducted metal detecting probes, and we located artifacts specific to a metal detector hit. If it was a big hit but there were no other hits near it, we just used the probe to see what it was and collect that artifact. And we did 10 at each of the sites. Following excavations, the artifacts collected from Feature 13 and 14 were sent to the University of Idaho's anthropology lab to be processed and cataloged by myself and these 2 lovely undergraduates. The slide shows a condensed version of both catalogs, showcasing the different groups and categories of artifacts. So we'll begin with feature 13, the first site we looked at during the 2021 PIT project. As you can see on the table, not too many artifacts were recovered from this site. Of the 390 artifacts collected, a large majority were on the surface. This slide only shows a tiny sample of the artifacts we noted and had collected at feature 13. Though there are a few artifacts, they do tell a compelling story. Most of the artifacts collected are tin cans. However, these tin cans are slightly different. They were carefully deconstructed, and holes or still nails showed they were used for something else. It looks like the cans were used as reinforcement for structural purposes, either shingles on a roof or to reinforce windows or walls. Another can was present that wasn't used for this purpose, but has some type of modification. As you can see, the Chinese dry food can in the bottom left portion of the slide has a very purposeful square cut out of it, suggesting some patchwork was needed, whether that is for the structure or for a different purpose. While most of the artifacts are described through what we call indefinite uses or structural remains, there are still domestics and activities that could be noted through the archaeological record. These small Chinese brown glazed stoneware ceramic sherds in the upper right-hand portion of the slide are just several found. These do not have any glazing on the base, so we know it's not associated with alcohol. And through diameter analysis, we can conclude that the vessels were most likely a spouted jar or a wide mouth jar, as you can see in the photos for comparison. The high presence of amethyst glass can also help us get some dates of the general site. However, the continual use of manganese and glass until 1960-1970 doesn't give us a very narrow date. And unfortunately, this area has a disturbance due to its location in the floodplain and later dated railroad spurs. There are some challenges in associating artifacts with specific periods, and with feature 13, we heavily utilize those primary documents and those mining claims and the datable artifacts we have. Feature 14 went through the same methodology, same system as feature 13, and the artifacts collected were wildly different. There's about double the amount of artifacts collected here as opposed to feature 13. This feature has also different types of disturbances. A decommissioned Forest Service road goes right through the feature, and multiple mining ditches are going throughout it. As opposed to feature 13, fewer structural artifacts were noted. However, the presence of the window pane and the raised platform suggest a cabin most likely was there. There's also a large variety of artifacts compared to the previous feature and more datable artifacts. The glass bases in the upper right-hand corner are attributed to the same company, the A and DH Chambers Company. This bitters bottle and beer bottle are dated from around 1860 to 1884. The other datable artifact is also on the right side of the slide, is a tobacco tin tag with the word Bengal on it. It was challenging to find information on tobacco tags, especially datable information. However, I could get available date ranges through newspapers and the times they were advertised, which gives this tobacco tag at around 1885 to 1893. We also see more artifacts associated with mining at this site. The presence of axe heads that are heavily disfigured from the mining activities, which is the bottom right of the slide, as well as tips from pickaxes and an actual pick handle connector, a metal connector, which isn't seen on the table. Where the previous feature, feature 13, was noted as having modified artifacts associated with those structural remains, primarily reinforcement types, feature 14's modified artifacts have a variety of associations, primarily with what we call domestics and a little bit of mining. A bundle of multiple gauge wire pieces were reconnected and rewrapped to be used at a later date. That was recovered from the site. A small cap from a can was recovered with holes punched on one side, suggesting maybe it was used as some type of shaker or sifter. It's about that big. And a meat can that had been emptied, holes were punched in and then reused, also on the slide. The working theory is either it was also a type of strainer, it is pretty small, or flip it on the other side and use it as a grater. Now I know this slide is very table heavy. This is the catalog from the 1333 site. These artifacts are housed at Southern Oregon University's Laboratory of Anthropology and were processed there. Since excavations occurred in 2018 and 2021, the catalogs are separated here. That's a little easier to read. This site offers a narrative of long-standing occupation compared to feature 13. The table on the bottom right-hand side of the slide shows the artifacts from that 2018 and 2021 excavation combined, with many artifacts recovered at that time. The center photo shows one of the methods used when excavating the site. Clearing the top surface to see the cabin feature more closely, we refer to this as horizontal exposure. A lot of mining camps, they're not dug very deep into the ground because they are temporary. So doing this exposure of the site helps show some of these features. This exposure seen in the photo shows both the inside and outside of the cabin, and we made sure that all the artifacts were noted in which situation, which association. Quarter test units were also conducted in this area, as well as opening up, making them a little bit larger depending on what was found. Much like feature 13 and 14, many artifacts are associated with structural remains, but that is not all we found. This site shows a more permanent living situation. There are similarities between these artifacts found, the presence of Chinese brown glazed stoneware and modified metals. However, the modified elements found at this site were used for specific mining purposes. So cans were again deconstructed, but were reused as grizzlies, which are a type of grate used in sluice channels. And a datable artifact was a bottle marking at about 1850s. Patterns have emerged from these features and the sites when looking at them both individually and together. We see that feature 13 and 1333 are possibly related using primary documents and comparing artifact typologies. 1333 was a long-standing camp for the company and was used primarily as a home base for many of the miners. Feature 13 looks to be a temporary camp used by the company expanding its presence in that mining area, testing where gold-rich soils were. The working theory is that feature 13 was shortly abandoned, primarily due to lack of gold, and the miners continued moving north up the drainage. However, the sheer number of reinforcement artifacts, those modified cans, conflict with this narrative to a certain extent. With the effort that goes into reinforcing a dwelling, it looks like the feature was abandoned for another reason, possibly the selling of the land itself. Feature 14 is also a long-standing camp, but at a later time. Some artifacts date to before or around the Ahi company. However, most are associated with the 1880s, at least 10 years after the company left. Based on the primary documents, mainly the newspaper reports and some mining claims, we're able to be located, those mining claims, at the county clerk's office, which was great. Feature 14 is associated with Euro-American mining camps that continually mined in the area for a long-standing time, and the presence of those two cabins also suggests long-term occupation. And while this feature isn't associated with the Chinese mining community in John Day, we now have a later dated Euro-American site that we can use as a reference point to mining camps at that time. All sites have in common the presence of these modified artifacts. However, the intention of those artifacts vary greatly. This tells us that regardless of the company, the distance from town and supplies required miners to reuse what they had and repurpose them for their needs. While the artifacts show a compelling story of mining throughout the area in early colonial John Day context, more research avenues can be pursued through this work. With the multi-dating sites, closer looks at the camps associated with this tributary can be examined for association to specific companies, and can create a better timeline of mining companies in that area. There is always more work to be done on a site, and too many rabbit holes to go down. which can be put on hold when given the reality of deadlines, funding, and ongoing lists of current projects that need to be prioritized. Even with this project, we're experiencing a shift in locations. This presentation is about Eastern Oregon mining, which is one of the primary locations for the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project. But now we're starting to do more work both in Jackson and Josephine counties through this partnership with the Rogue River-Siskiyou National Forest, and continuing using the Passport in Time participants and university students. Previous works in Jackson County include the Jacksonville Chinese Quarters, Buck Rock Tunnel, and sites associated with Jinlin. But in the larger context of Chinese diaspora studies, there are general overview elements that we need to focus on and make a priority. Many common misunderstandings about Chinese diaspora communities are still happening today. A benefit of this project is the encouragement and ability to engage with the public during archaeology days, talks, and presentations to explain the work we're currently doing and to garner interest in our study. But through that, I have noticed a shared public memory of the Chinese experiences, and it can be flawed. There are discussions of Chinese miners only being utilized for cheap labor. Essentially, they were not allowed to own land and therefore just reworked tailings that Euro-American mining companies gave up on. And there is a heightened sense of exotification or otherness when discussing Chinese culture and communities. The emphasis on artifacts deemed only used by Chinese, or this fixation on violence to underrepresented communities. And this creates a further disconnect that, as archaeologists, we try to demolish. And through this work, we're able to confront some of those misunderstandings. We know that Chinese miners have agency. There are formations of mining companies, being the first ones to lay claim to an area for mining. The partnerships and connections within the community outside of their culture are seen through the continuous celebration of, the Jinlin Trail in Jacksonville, or Lon and Ying He from Kam Wah Chung and John Day. And we learned that just because an artifact was imported from China, it does not mean that a Chinese individual was the only one allowed to use that object. That goods and services within a small town are limited, and we look at this, Western frontier as a way to reinvent ourselves and use the goods available to create something that reminds us of home and also demonstrates what can be created in our new environment. We must prioritize sharing the resources and the information we uncover with the public and interested communities. Far too often, archaeology can be placed in this very, privileged setting of education, which isn't readily accessible. I will say that this project has been great at hosting public days and presenting talks such as this one, where we can share some information. But how do we make a change in this collective public memory? Should we do a top to bottom reconstructing that focuses on teaching just college students and professionals these updated learnings and hopes they trickle down to the general public? Or should we start the opposite way and going to schools, participating in not just public archaeology days, but through local celebrations such as having a booth at the county fair? And how do we know that this work is having the effort we want it to? Is having the effect, we want it to? Can one conversation or one presentation make a difference? Or do we need to have something physical that will remind people of the work being done, on the misunderstandings and misconceptions we're confronting? And there are resources available, academic journals and books, but sometimes those cost money and those require resources not everyone has. And are we making them easily available? Say, are they at this library? I do not know the answers to these questions, nor do I think just one archaeologist or one person should have the answer. It's an ongoing discussion that needs to happen and take precedence when we're going through projects focusing on diaspora. We look to further this study and add more nuance than the researchers before us did. And however many decades down the road, there will be new researchers studying the same communities, wondering why we didn't add specific nuances or updated information that is set to their current societal standards. We need to ask how future students and future community members will look at our work and if it did aid in a better understanding of the past. But in the meantime, I hope that the work being conducted at these sites will inspire researchers, archaeologists, and community members to work together on building a more accurate and complex story of mining on our lands. Thank you. And here are some links for more information, including the Asian American Comparative Collection. They do take donations. The SULA general website, the official website for the Oregon Chinese Diaspora Project, discusses some of the site-specific work we've done, as well as Passport in Time, if any of you would ever like to be a participant for a PIT project. We love having people.